After my stepdaughter humiliated me at dinner, my husband sneered, "She's not your daughter, so don't you dare correct her." My lawyer urged me to file for divorce immediately, but I just smiled and said, "No, he's completely right." Everyone thought I was spineless for staying. But at the final court hearing, when my husband realized why his credit cards were declining and why his daughter's private school tuition was unpaid, his face turned ghost white. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The day I stopped acting like a mother was the exact day I started taking back control of my life. My husband thought he was setting boundaries to protect his spoiled daughter, but all he really did was open my eyes to how much of their luxurious lifestyle was being funded entirely by me. My name is Clara, I'm 32 years old, and for 4 years, I made the mistake of thinking love could buy respect. When I married Richard, I didn't just take on a husband, I inherited his 14-year-old daughter, Chloe. Richard was charming, but he was also perpetually between investments. As a senior marketing executive pulling in a high six-figure salary, I didn't mind taking care of the household. I paid for Chloe's elite private school tuition, her designer wardrobe, her horseback riding lessons, and every single family vacation. I treated her like my own flesh and blood. In return, Chloe treated me like an intrusive landlord who paid her bills. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday evening during dinner. I had cooked a warm meal after working a 12-hour day. Chloe sat at the table, scrolling on her phone, and rolled her eyes when I asked her to put it away during dinner. When I gently reminded her about table manners, she slammed her fork down, looked me dead in the eye, and sneered. "You're not my mother, Clara. Stop acting like you own me just because you live here." I looked over at Richard, expecting him to step in, to back me up, or to teach his daughter a basic lesson in gratitude. Instead, Richard wiped his mouth with a napkin, glared at me with cold arrogance, and said, "She's right, Clara. She's not your daughter. Don't correct her." The room went dead silent. Chloe smirked, victorious, while Richard nonchalantly picked up his glass of wine, a bottle bought with my money. A cold, crystal-clear realization washed over me. He was completely right. She wasn't my daughter. And if I had no right to parent her, I certainly had no obligation to fund her. Instead of arguing or causing a scene, I simply nodded, picked up my plate, and said, "You're completely right, Richard. My mistake." Chloe's smug smile widened, and Richard looked satisfied, clearly believing he had put me in my place, and asserted his dominance. They thought I was submitting. They had no idea that my silence was actually the quiet before the storm. The very next morning, while Richard was still fast asleep and dreaming of his self-proclaimed authority, I went to work. I sat down with my financial advisor and began the methodical process of untangling my life from theirs. For 4 years, my hard-earned money had been the invisible engine powering their lavish lifestyle. That engine was about to shut down entirely. First, I removed Richard as an authorized user on my primary high-limit credit cards. Next, I called the administrative office at Chloe's prestigious private school and instructed them to remove my bank account from their automatic payment portal for her upcoming semester tuition. The horseback riding academy, her luxury salon memberships, and her unlimited shopping allowances were all unlinked from my accounts within 48 hours. I didn't make a grand declaration or throw a dramatic tantrum. I simply reverted to being what Richard demanded, a non-parent. If Chloe wasn't my daughter, her expenses were no longer my burden. Meanwhile, Richard remained completely oblivious, strutting around the house with the unearned confidence of a man who thought he had successfully tamed his wealthy wife. For 2 weeks, the house operated under a deceptive sense of calm. Richard strutted around like a king who had successfully asserted his dominance, while Chloe continued her usual routine of cold stares and silent disrespect. They truly believed I had been put in my place. They didn't realize the safety net had been completely removed beneath their feet. The first crack in their illusion appeared on a Friday evening. Richard decided to host an impromptu dinner party at an upscale downtown steakhouse to impress 3 potential investors for his latest business venture. Naturally, he brought Chloe along, encouraging her to order the most expensive appetizers and desserts on the menu to project an image of effortless wealth. I sat at the end of the table, sipping my water and playing the quiet, dutiful wife while Richard loudly held court, boasting about his success and ordering two $300 bottles of wine. When the waiter finally brought the heavy leather book containing the substantial bill, Richard didn't even look at the total. He casually tossed out the sleek black credit card I had quietly canceled 10 days prior, flashing a confident smile at his guests. Minutes later, the waiter returned, leaning down discreetly. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined." Richard's smile instantly froze. His face flushed a deep crimson as he glared across the table at me, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Clara, what is the meaning of this? Pay the bill." I took a slow sip of my water, looked him dead in the eye, and replied softly, "Oh, I didn't organize this dinner, Richard. And, as you reminded me, I don't manage family expenses anymore." The public humiliation at the steakhouse sent Richard into a blinding rage. The moment we stepped through the front door of our home, he exploded, accusing me of sabotaging his business reputation and acting out of childish spite. When he threatened to hire an accountant to review our joint bank accounts and expose my selfishness, I didn't flinch. Instead, I hired a top-tier forensic accountant the very next morning to audit him. What my investigator uncovered in less than 48 hours left me stunned. For the past 2 years, Richard hadn't just been living off my high six-figure income, he had been actively stealing from me. He had established a secret secondary bank account, systematically siphoning small, calculated transfers from our shared household fund. Over 24 months, he had funneled nearly $75,000 directly to his ex-wife under the guise of back child support, while simultaneously telling me her demands were ruining him. Worse yet, his booming consulting firm was an absolute ghost ship. It generated zero actual revenue. His entire public persona, his tailored suits, his country club visits, and his daughter's lifestyle were built entirely on my hard work, while he quietly bled me dry to finance his secret debts and bolster his fragile ego. I gathered every bank statement, forged signature, and illicit transfer record into a thick leather binder. I wasn't just dealing with an arrogant husband and an ungrateful stepdaughter anymore. I was dealing with a calculating financial parasite. I carefully documented every single dollar, building an ironclad case that would destroy his illusions of grandiosity once and for all. The reckoning arrived on a rainy Monday afternoon. Chloe came home early from school, throwing her designer bag onto the couch and sobbing hysterically. The private school had officially barred her from attending classes due to unpaid tuition, and her classmates had witnessed the entire humiliating scene. Richard stormed into my home office minutes later, his face contorted in absolute fury. "Have you lost your mind?" he screamed, slamming his fists onto my desk. "You humiliated my daughter. You ruined her future over your pathetic ego. I demand you fix this right now." I sat calmly behind my desk, pulled out the thick leather binder, and slid a single printed spreadsheet across the table toward him. "That is an itemized breakdown of the $340,000 I have personally spent on you and Chloe over the last 4 years, I said, my voice steady and cold. "Every dollar of tuition, every vacation, every tailored suit. Since you clearly stated I am not her mother and have no right to correct her, I am officially resigning from funding her life." Before he could process the numbers, I pulled out 2 more documents and set them beside the spreadsheet. "The first document is a formal notice of separate finances," I continued, looking him dead in the eye. "The second is a 30-day eviction notice for this house, which, as you know, was purchased solely under my name before I ever met you. You have 4 weeks to find a new place for you and your daughter." 3 weeks later, we stood inside a packed family court. Richard had refused to go quietly. Desperate to preserve his lifestyle, he hired an aggressive attorney and filed a countersuit, demanding temporary spousal support, half of my liquid assets, and full ownership of our residence, claiming I had abandoned my parental duties to Chloe and caused severe emotional distress. Richard sat at the petitioner's table, wearing a sharp suit bought with my money, attempting to look like a devoted father wronged by a cold-hearted stepmother. His lawyer painted me as a ruthless, wealthy woman who had unilaterally cut off a helpless child. When it was our turn, my attorney stood up with a quiet, confident smile. He didn't offer long speeches. Instead, he presented the judge with a certified transcript of text messages and audio recordings from the night of our dinner argument. My lawyer played the clear, undeniable audio recording through the courtroom speakers. Richard's arrogant voice echoed off the walls. "She's not your daughter. Don't correct her." My attorney then presented the forensic accounting audit, exposing the $75,000 Richard had secretly siphoned from our joint account to his ex-wife, along with proof that Richard's consulting firm was completely fraudulent. The judge's expression hardened instantly. She looked over her glasses at Richard, whose face had drained of all color. The judge ruled that I owed no parental duty to a child whose father explicitly barred me from parenting her. She dismissed Richard's demands for alimony, enforced our prenuptial agreement in full, and ordered Richard to immediately reimburse me $75,000 for stolen joint funds or face asset seizure. 6 months after the final court ruling, my life has completely transformed. Richard and Chloe were forced to move into a tiny, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Unable to afford the private academy, Chloe was transferred to a local public school, where her entitled attitude quickly earned her no favors. Richard now works long hours at an entry-level sales job just to pay off his mounting legal debts and court-ordered reimbursements. As for me, I sold the large, empty house and bought a stunning beachfront villa overlooking the Pacific. Without the financial burden of 2 parasites, my bank account is thriving, and for the first time in years, I wake up to absolute peace and serenity. Standing on my balcony, watching the sunset, I realized that stepping back wasn't an act of defeat. It was my greatest victory. By taking Richard's arrogant words literally, I freed myself from a toxic trap and reclaimed my life, my wealth, and my dignity. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. Do you think I went too far by cutting off my stepdaughter, or did Richard get exactly what he deserved? Comment your thoughts below.